we got a very special treat for you. We have an interview with John Philapavage, the guy who's doing the ECW documentary that you've read all over the interwebs, especially on Kickstarter. So if you want to do us a favor, John, you want to say hi to everybody?
Hey, everybody.
Okay, first off, just give us a quick brief for people who haven't checked out the Kickstarter and haven't really, gotten the real history about it. If you could just give us a brief on why you started it and why we should support it and that type of thing, just feel free to go right ahead.
Oh, that's a big ego question. Obviously, it's because it's the best documentary ever, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Other than that.
No, well, we started it in March of 2000. I've been a wrestling fan since I was probably 5 or 6 years old back in the 80s. I got into ECW in the mid-90s, and I wanted to document it. My first idea was, really crappy. I just wanted to do, a fan thing about going to the ECW arena. But then when I got I think my third interview was Todd Gordon, who was the founder. And by that point, I wanted to do something a lot more in depth with it. And we shot a lot of footage in 2001 and 2002, and then it's just, we started when we were 19. And we weren't rich, and we had to have, we had college and had to make money for ourselves, supporting ourselves. And we kept starting and stopping and, trying to gain traction. And now we finally are going to finish it. We shot another 15 hours this year, so we have a total of 50 hours and over 60 interviews, some people twice over the course of 11 years. I don't know. For me, it's important just because I've been a fan, like I said, going back for a long time, but as far as being a fan who was online and found out about wrestling journalism, I'd say in the late 90s. And, I feel like with wrestling, quote unquote, documentaries, it's either something that's very surface, that's oh, I'm an outsider and I'm going to check at this weird thing, and it doesn't get, too in depth or, treat it with enough seriousness. Or you swing the other way and you have something like WWE produced stuff, which is only going to be seen by the biggest wrestling fans. It's really something that's produced for somebody who understands wrestling. And it has a lot more to do with oh, how cool was it when, the Sandman did this angle with Tommy Dreamer? That's not what we're doing at all. Our documentary has almost nothing to do with storylines, angles, characters. It tells a human story with an ensemble cast. We've interviewed, a lot of the wrestlers are in it. We tell their stories as it is appropriate within the context of the film, but there's not one person we follow around. We interviewed wrestlers. We've interviewed a lot of behind the scenes staff at ECW, and a lot of those people you just don't know or you haven't heard from. And that's the stuff that was interesting to me, the business, the marketing, the branding of ECW, the behind the scenes story of how it all came together. The way that they use the internet. They were the first wrestling internet company that really caught this wave when the internet was really in its infancy in your homes. And the way they use that using fan conventions to spread the word. The way that they branded themselves, they were the first promotion that I know of that was oh, it's not about a top star. It's about ECW. You chant ECW. The star became kind of secondary and almost interchangeable after a while. So, I just wanted to do something that was an intelligent wrestling documentary from a wrestling fan that wrestling fans could be proud of if you're really deep into it, but you want to be able to watch it with a friend of yours who thinks it's stupid that you like wrestling. And it just so happened that ECW was the story that I wanted, do it about. But it's a documentary that happens to be about wrestling. It's not I would term something like what WWE puts out, even though it's very well produced, it's a wrestling video. It's you're not going to watch that unless you're a wrestling fan. I want to do something that could get out there to film festivals and get out to people so that you guys could go take your non-wrestling fans and then maybe hopefully it sparks some intelligent discussion about it because we got so in depth with different things, as far as violence and, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I'm sorry to cut you off here, John, but you say it passes, it pretty much passes the non-wrestling friend level. Does it pass the female level?
Can you sit down with your girlfriend on the couch and watch this? Is there a girlfriend mode?
Is there an option to watch it in girlfriend mode?
That's tough with ECW. I think that they'll end up liking certain people, like somebody like a Johnny Grunge or a Ted Petty or Tony Lewis, who was a very involved fan that really helped them along the way, who's somebody that we recognize. Those people are like really likable. I mean, even New Jack is likable, and we talk about how he stabbed a guy in it, you know? In a lot of ways, you know. I'm interested to see how a normal person, when we go to festivals, feels about New Jack after they see the whole thing. Because there are parts where he's very charming and very intelligent, and then there's other parts where you're like, whoa, that's kind of crazy, you know?
Yeah, sitting on my shelf is the documentary that came out. It was 101 Reasons Not to Be a Pro Wrestler. Have you seen that one?
No, I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, they interviewed a lot of guys, and one of which they actually followed around was New Jack. And I was like, I would totally go have a drink with him. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, halfway through the documentary, they show him in front of like 15 fans in a gymnasium wrestling a guy who's in his early to mid 50s, who like hasn't wrestled since, you know, 1976 and in a hardcore match. And what you expect to have, the fans were getting in the way saying, get out of here. You're going to kill him. Get out of here.
Yeah.
After they've been blooding him up. But,
you know, I've met him twice and like, I don't want to test it a third time. You know, like, I feel like I got away twice and actually had good interactions. Because when I interviewed him, he actually had a machete in a sheath on his lap.
Nice.
So, like,
he was armed?
What's this?
He was armed, so he had a wet person while he's talking to you.
Yeah. I mean, I brought it up right away, and I was like, that's not in case this goes bad. And he gave me crazy eyes and a smile, and I knew we were cool then, so.
And he gave me crazy eyes and a smile, and that's when I left.
Yeah.
So I knew we were cool, and we had cookies.
Well, yeah, I figure why tempt fate? I met a lot of crazy people on this journey. You know what I mean? What a bunch to document. I mean, there's a lot of charismatic interviews in it, you know.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you've interviewed Sandman, Raven, Balls Mahoney, New Jack, you know, right there. I mean, that's exemplary that you managed to get these guys sitting down. One thing I want to ask you, have you seen the WWE's documentary, The Rise and Fall of ECW?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
okay.
that really helped us. I was really bummed because obviously we started ours before that and had a lot of it shot and just didn't have the money or the wherewithal to take it, you know, anywhere. And you know what? It wasn't a complete project at that point. It wasn't nearly as holistic as it became once we got more of the wrestling media and we got, you know, the front office people and all the pieces in place. I did see it, you know, and it's fine. Again, I go back to like the wrestling video thing. Like a lot of that has to do with angles and characters and whatnot. And when they touch on something serious, like the way they handled the Eric Koulas incident, are you guys familiar with that?
Yes, the mass transit.
Right.
The mass transit thing.
The way that they handled that in there was like, oh, New Jack beat up a kid really bad. I think that's the quote that Paul Heyman has. New Jack beat it. And there's just a lot of things that WWE doesn't handle because it doesn't behoove them. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, if North Korea, and this is crappy because it makes them look worse than I mean, but if North Korea bought South Korea and they were making a documentary about South Korea, would you think it's the most objective thing that it was put out there? It's not quite. They have things that they want to protect. They now own a brand.
So that is the best comparison ever. That's perfect. That's a perfect analogy. That's just perfect because you're absolutely right. It's like, well, that's the thing, like when you get these documentaries, that's why I want to draw fans' attention to your documentary, because the stuff from WWE, it's going to be borderline. I mean, I don't want to say, the problem is you don't want to bust out the word propaganda, but like you say, they're protecting a brand. Yeah. They own ECW. They make I don't know if they make money on merchandising or what, but that is WWE property. And it's a gray area when you talk about the mass transit incident, or if you just want to bring up New Jack in general, you're going to run into those kind of hazy areas.
There's just a lot of things in our documentary that they didn't really touch on, or they touched on but they shied away from, or they just didn't really get in depth. And a lot of that has to do with, like, we reached out to the wrestling journalists. You know, everybody who was covering ECW in the 90s, I shouldn't say everybody, the major figures who were covering ECW in the 90s as wrestling journalists. Are in our film. And these are guys who were talking to Paul Heyman like all the time during that period. And in some cases with the torch, they were involved in the fallout of the mass transit incident and the pay-per-view almost being canceled. And we cover that. There was a bit of a blame game going on there. which I don't know that everybody knows that story, but it is covered in the film.
Oh,
So
okay, cool.
the journalists do one thing I had a problem with wrestlers is they're very much in the present. And they don't have a lot of perspective or give a lot of context. It was just kind of like, one wrestler was like, he told me, and this is after it had folded. This is like 4 months after it folded. In an interview with me, he was like, TNN was awesome for us. We were in a lot of homes. And I was like, well, you guys are out of business, right? They didn't support you at all from all the facts that I gathered, but, they didn't pay for production. They didn't, promote you, but so I went to wrestling journalists, and they really kind of give us a perspective and a context to everything that's going on in the 90s so that a normal person can understand it. And also it's pretty neat if you're a wrestling fan because you feel like you're being treated with respect and intelligence. Or at least that's the hope. I mean, because I'm like that. I'm one of those people who's been a fan forever who wanted to have a smart wrestling documentary that was really in depth.
Yeah, which is exactly why, we're the same way. We got so excited when we saw your documentary, and that's why we gotta get this guy on. We gotta get all our fans to go to the Kickstarter page, donate all their life savings to make sure this thing happens. That's hands down for us. Now, when you look at the project, you mentioned that a lot of the wrestlers that you had, they were focused on the present. Is there anybody who you thought that was like ECW lifer? Like they were going to name their kids ECW because they just absolutely loved it. Did you talk to any wrestlers that were really like that, where you're like, this guy is company through and through?
Well, kind of. I don't know. Like when I talked to Axel Rotten the first time, he was kind of bitter about everything, but he was very intelligent. He was actually very well spoken. And the second time I talked to him was at the Extreme Reunion where we spent 3 days this year, filming at their reunion show. And he was much more kind of like the company that we build. He still really didn't have much great to say about Paul Heyman, but him and Balls Mahoney, I would say, are kind of like that, but they're not quite. But I have met a guy, actually. They're one of their fans. I've met a few of them, but one of them in the 90s, I won't say the gentleman's name because that's not fair, but he was a little crazy, and he had an ECW, a really bad ECW tattoo. And he was talking about how he's angry at the company. He sold me his VHS collection. This is back when they had VHS tapes. He sold it to me when I was 16, and I met with him, and I think my mom took me to meet him, and he was just kind of crazy.
Was the tattoo self-induced? Like, did he do it himself?
Like, I don't think so, but it was. If you told me it was, I'd also believe that. Like they have a really distinctive logo that's all over the place. Like even back then they did. So you could have taken that to a tattoo artist. So we either went to a really lazy tattoo artist, A, or B, it was some sort of weird interpretation of their logo. I don't know, man.
Hey, 6-year-old, here's my tattooing pen. Get to work.
And he was like 35 years old too. I don't know.
I just love the fact that you bought VHS tapes from him. Like you just convinced your mom to drive you all the way out there to this 35-year-old guy with an ECW tattoo, a shitty ECW tattoo on his person. Mom, I want to buy tapes from this guy. I mean, that's just
I had to
awesome.
Set up a whole loan with my mom to do this. This was like a serious thing for me because I was 16 and I don't even know if I had a job yet or I was getting a job, and I promised to pay it back. I think the guys charged me like $100 or something that you could get so cheap now, but at the time I was
a lot of money.
I need all of these I need to watch it from the beginning to the end, And I met him at like a Burger King, like halfway between where he lived and where I lived. Yeah, my mom was not happy about this.
Okay, so
how does she feel about it now?
I don't even know if she remembers. I hope she doesn't remember. I hope I haven't scarred her.
You don't think she's bringing it up to her friends about the time she drove her son all the way out to a Burger King so he could buy, a box full of tapes from some random dude?
Right. With a prison tattoo of ECW, yeah.
I think he was in drugs, Cheryl.
Not kitty porn.
Yeah, who knows?
No, man, it'd be like hentai or something like that. It'd be weird. It wouldn't just be kitty porn. It'd be like tentacle kitty porn. Okay, now the 800-pound gorilla in the room is Paul Heyman. From a fan's perspective, we often credit, not really myself so much, Paul Heyman for being this incredible gifted writer and a leader in the wrestling business. I would say writer, not so much leader, but that's just me. And here's the thing, I want to kick this to you because I am willing to change my mind. Mike has pointed out some things to me that really opened my eyes, and I want to see what you think. Basically, he could the IWC at large believes that he could pretty much save any bad situation. And do you feel the same feeling or adoration from those that you interviewed? I mean, kind of like the insider perspective. Do you see him? Was he kind of like that mythical character in the industry?
I think that now guys a lot more give him credit. I think when I got a lot of guys, the company had folded and he had screwed a lot of people out of money, or at least had made a lot of big promises that he couldn't come through with. And I think they thought that they felt kind of dicked around. I mean, he doesn't always have the reputation for telling the truth, Yeah. So I think that they were less likely to give him credit the first time around, although a lot of them did. A lot of them were honest. I don't know that he can save every situation. I know from personal experience from studying the man for years and being a fan of what they did, I think that he's very forward thinking. Like, I don't think Paul Heyman cares one bit about ECW anymore. Paul Heyman, was trying to buy into Strikeforce a few years ago, like 2007, 2008, which is an MMA promotion. Mm-hmm. I think he did great, smart work on SmackDown in 2002, and a lot of people can say, oh, well, they had a great crew. All you got to do is book the matches. Well, if it was that simple, then everybody would do it. You know what I mean? I think he books a certain brand of wrestling that's pretty multifaceted if given the reins to do it. I think the big test has already passed. The big test would have been if he would have gone to TNA in 2000. I guess it would have been 2009 or 2010, where there was talk of that. I think that would have been the big test. I don't ever think he'll get into a position where he'll be able to do anything creative again in wrestling. I know he's never. I would think he's never going to spend his own money again, or his family rather.
Yeah, I don't see him running his own company ever again. I mean, he's doing some stuff in WWE, and you can kind of see once he came into WWE, especially with the Brock Lesnar thing, you can see things were changing, and the way, like, Lesnar and Triple H's last match, like Mike and I were talking about it during the pay-per-view, SummerSlam, where the lights dimmed and they introduced it like an MMA match. I mean, that was classic Heyman. As far as, look, I mean, my thing is, I mean, it's hard for me to have this kind of discussion because it seems like whenever I bring up Heyman on the show, I don't want to say I'm vilified, but I'm clearly in the minority as far as my opinions regarding him. Being a phenomenal booker, but not so much a great. Like he's not the guy you want in charge. He's the guy you want answering to the guy in charge, and that's the impression I get. Is that? Do you agree with that, or do you think that it doesn't really fit?
I think that if you can get him in a scenario, which there just won't be in modern wrestling, I just don't think this scenario would exist where it would be financially viable that Heyman would want to do it. But I think if you can let him handle creative but not own anything, and he has almost all but a little final say, I think that he could do something very interesting. I do. He can't have total final say. He can't hold on to business stuff. But I do think that he could still contribute something, not perfect, but something very interesting to the wrestling landscape. I do.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Mike from PW Torch, he was the one that what really opened my eyes about is that he pointed out that, see what you want about Paul Heyman. Every time he built somebody up, WWE or WCW snatched him. So he was constantly having to build up and book these guys that nobody else wanted. And he built a brand around that. And so for his faults, all of his faults, you have to look at that and go, the guy was a success when it came to that. He could take what nobody else wanted and make something of it. At least that's from the fans. At least that's from our perspective. I don't know if you look at it as a different way.
I think our film definitely speaks to that. I mean, people in it. One thing that's important to note is that there's no narration in this film. It's an oral history, But so you're not really getting my opinion or my partner Kevin Kiernan's opinion. But the opinions that you'll get, I mean, there's a lot of credit given to Heyman about. We really tried to look at what were the things exactly, and not generalizations, but what were the things that Heyman did that made him unique or that got the attention of people. And again, I use the term multifaceted. I think he did so much with so little. And that's pretty, like, a lot of it's old school stuff, but he obviously had a new slant on it for the time. But he's also willing to change with the times, which I think is something that's really hard to do in wrestling, or at least keep the core of what wrestling is. People sometimes say, like, 70s wrestling or something like that. 70s territorial wrestling. I heard that a lot when UFC got popular. Oh, it's quote unquote books, just like 70s territorial wrestling. And, you know, I've only seen a little territorial wrestling from the 70s, so I can't completely speak on that. But I think the basic idea is the core values of what, you know, Booking 101 is, that isn't like a entertainment product in a goofy sense, but that presents serious fights. I think that's something that Heyman would do, is that he does with Brock Lesnar very well, the big match atmosphere. I think he built that well. He did it with Sabu and Taz in ECW. He really built that up, you know. If you look back at Sabu, I mean, he's just basically a lot of spots, you know, and Taz was like never this big guy, but he made you think he was an MMA fighter who was a giant killer, who could just kill anybody. He was a badass. You know, that's impressive. I wish they would do something like that. You know, Bryan Danielson, or I guess Daniel Bryan now, they do a decent job with him. I'm glad to see where he is, but like, you know, they could make him a killer if they wanted to. It's all in how you present somebody.
No, that's absolutely fair. So I mean, really, the $1,000 question is obviously not now, but were you ever able to get, you know, an interview with Heyman in the past, or did he turn you down? Was it was it a non-starter?
Oh, we chased him for a while. No, you know, he doesn't sit for anybody unless it's like he's being, you know, unless it's WWE because they're his bosses and it behooves him to. No, I think Paul's, without giving away too much, like, I mean, I'm sure some people have seen the video we put out today. Paul Heyman's perspective in certain areas definitely comes out in the film. Certainly people speak to Paul, to what Paul felt and what Paul did in our film. A lot of people do. I think it's kind of interesting, you know, and I know this is kind of like a minimizing the fact that we don't have a Paul Heyman interview, but I think it's kind of interesting to do something like this where the ghost of Paul Heyman kind of hangs over it. You've got a lot of people, you know, talking about, you know, firsthand information of talking with Paul, or conjecture as to what Paul was doing, or what he was thinking. And we do have a lot of firsthand people who dealt with Paul in our film who talk about that. But it's kind of interesting to do something that you can construct without having him in it. It got to the point about 5 years ago where I had an email correspondence with him that didn't quite go, you know, anywhere. And I was just like, you know what? I'm okay with not having him at this point. I think that we can still make something valuable that doesn't necessarily need to contain a Paul Heyman interview. And I think that we're succeeding in that.
Yeah, and there is value in that. I mean, like, all right, I'm a huge Mark Twain fan, and I've read a lot of documentaries about him, or a lot of biographies about him, written by a lot of different perspectives, interviewing, going through different literature and stuff like that. And then there was one that I read that was basically like from Mark Twain's mouth, and I really wish I never read that, because once you get it from the source, all the multifaceted layers that make a figure like that up, like a Paul Heyman, or even Vince McMahon. I know for a fact a documentary much like yours, in fact, it'd be great if you did it, will be about Vince McMahon. Mm-hmm. It's gone. I mean, you're getting it from the horse's mouth, and then all that, getting the reflections of that person from another figure that interacted with them becomes so much more interesting, because it just adds these little pieces, because you know what they're saying. Yeah, it's coming through their filter, but there's a grain of truth. There's something there to what they're saying, and then it just makes such an amazing mosaic of what a person is, and you lose that when you get it directly from the source.
Well, and the other thing is that the source might not always be that truthful. Or spin things. I mean, I think
exactly.
Paul Heyman has a certain reputation for being, I mean, I studied the guy for years. I've watched a lot of tape and listened to a lot of interviews of him. He is brilliant at the way he's the son of a lawyer, you know, a very successful lawyer in New York City. And, he knows how to position and talk to people in a certain way. He can explain away anything. He really can. So, like, you know, you're almost going into a battle of wits when you're interviewing somebody like that, and then using that material, you know, it's one of those things where, not that I would, you know, if he called me tomorrow and said, all right, you know, I'd like to do an interview, of course we would do it, you know what I mean?
All right, so real quick, rapid fire from the live chat and from Twitter. Robert says, wants to know, what is the most surprising information about ECW that the fans may not know about? The second most surprising, because the first most surprising, you have to get the documentary. But the second most surprising thing, I think you can give that away for free, right?
Well, I'd have to I'm struggling to think of what exactly would be shocking information. Like,
just off the top of your head, just something that you, like, whenever you talk about it, the first thing you think of is, like, if someone says, well, what about this? And you go, you know what? This is going to blow your mind.
I think the situation between Eddie Gilbert and Paul Heyman is interesting. That we cover in there. I mean, we start from the formation, and we cover the Gilbert, the year that Gilbert was there. I think it's interesting the way that Paul, kind of snuck in there but didn't. I think the story has always been that Paul stabbed his best friend in the back. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that.
You mean like the buyout and when he got fired and that type of thing?
Well, no, Eddie Gilbert was the booker.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm thinking of something else.
Are you talking about Todd Gordon? Oh,
yeah, I'm sorry.
I mean, that situation is interesting too. I think, Todd readily admits to making calls for people. That's an interesting conversation. Where he basically agrees that he made calls and tried to get into WCW, but he disagrees with the idea that he was a secret mole, which I've never quite been able to understand what the difference is. That's something.
I wasn't being secret. I was just flat out doing it.
I was in the room. That's fair. No, that's a really good point. It is kind of one of those things where, what he said was, it's like, no, dude, you're a mole then. I mean, you were kind of going around the company's back, talking to WCW. That's kind of being a mole.
Yeah, that's an interesting situation. I think I found it interesting the end, because we've just been editing the first draft of the ending, how multifaceted the end is, as far as everybody wants quick, easy information in our age, and it's like, well, what killed ECW? Was it this? Okay, good. They want a one-word answer, and there's just so many things that went into it.
Yeah, which leads me into my next question, which is this is perfect. At Breaking Kayfabe on Twitter said, in the rise and fall of ECW, Vince said that Heyman used violence and edginess too much, and that's why ECW failed. You obviously disagree. You think it's more multifaceted than that?
I just think it's funny that Vince McMahon has an opinion on it. Really, he was ever really paying that much attention to them. I don't know where he bases that opinion on. I think that they did narrow cast towards the end. I think it's a part of it. I don't think that's completely off base. But, I mean, when you guarantee contracts, when you have to sign guys to deals because you're losing them to the big two, so you have to promise them more money. And part of that is because pay-per-view and for possible television, before they even got the TNN deal, the pay-per-view companies were like, well, we want you to have these guys nailed down. So they have to have these long-term big contracts for $200,000, say. When before they were paying guys, and they could pay guys, $200 a night.
Yeah.
And then where do you get that money from? Business is supposed to double if you're on pay-per-view or if you're on, the idea was that business would double, I should say. That's the, direct quote from Office people, was that, we're going to go on TV, we're going to be on pay-per-view, and business is going to double and merchandise will sell nationally and all this stuff. And it really wasn't as they expanded. The other thing is that being on pay-per-view, you have to, you have to have at a bare minimum $250,000 to run a pay-per-view. And that's before a lot of other costs. But they had to borrow that money. So they had to pay high interest loans because they needed such a quick turnaround on that. And the pay-per-view money wasn't coming back quickly enough. I mean, some of the pay-per-view money doesn't come back for over a year.
Yeah,
so now you have a problem there.
So they're just getting squeezed from all sides. So it was like one of those things where it was just like all these little bits, like Jenga. You just keep removing pieces, eventually it's going to fall.
And Paul Heyman didn't delegate well. They didn't have a central office, which is something that some of the office people complained to me about, that they didn't have one place. They had people working out of their houses or on cell phones. You couldn't get a hold of Paul Heyman. Again, he didn't delegate, and,
his non-delegation, it's been said that he had to have his hands in every single facet. When you get to a certain point, you just can't do that. I mean, it's just not good business sense, because not one person doesn't know everything about how to do everything, and they can't.
Well, and the other thing is, I've heard off the record that nobody would completely go on the record with this, but people did say that the deals that he signed were really crazy. They were rob Peter to pay Paul kind of deals, where it's like, okay, a video game developer came to them and he's like, he sold the rights for like $25,000 or something like that. I mean, that's a hearsay story, obviously, but,
that's insane.
Right.
Yeah, in perpetuity, you know what I mean? Like really?
Holy crap.
Yeah.
Well, it's just Heyman always struck me as the kind of guy who whatever gets me what I want right now, and then the rest will just handle itself.
That's pretty much what I found. Yeah.
And yeah, if I had to point to like any one major thing that caused the end of ECW, it'd be kind of what you were talking about there, the whole, Heyman not delegating, just saying, okay, I'm in charge, I'm going to handle every aspect, and then people not being able to get a hold of him, and it becomes a case of the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. I mean, you have talented office people in ECW who know how to run a business that are trying to do one thing, and then over here, Paul Heyman is going in a completely different direction.
Yeah. No, that's one of those things that, like, I always heard that, like, when you're voting for president of the United States, you're basically voting for the dumbest person in the room, and that's exactly why. Because they're delegating is what they're doing. You're hiring that guy to make decisions of what a bunch of other smart people are saying. So the president is always, at any given time, the dumbest person in the room. So whenever someone doesn't believe that in a business sense, I worry. Like with Vince and WWE, the fact that he's stepping down, I think is a great thing for WWE. But that's another thing with like Paul Heyman. It's like, well, if he has to have his hands in everything, there you go. What was Oso on Twitter said, what was the one moment that made you an ECW fan where you converted and you're like, these guys are awesome?
Oh, I think it happened somewhat gradually. Like, I look back, I know I found it on TV because I'm from Allentown, Pennsylvania. This is only, roughly an hour outside of Philly. So I got Sports Channel Philadelphia, which was their flagship channel for their syndication network, which is another thing that was killing them, was paying for TV for all those years. So they had to pay a lot of money for a lot of markets. I saw Public Enemy interviews. The early Public Enemy interviews would be like in the middle of like the ghetto, and they'd go on for like 8 minutes, and they'd go from funny to serious to funny to serious again. Shane Douglas's early interviews, because he was talking about Ric Flair, and at the time I was like, well, the universes never crossed. In the early 90s, like WWE never talked about WCW, WCW never talked about WWE, and there was this promotion that was just talking about everybody. And then, there were guys, like, I knew of Shane Douglas because he had been in other promotions. I knew of Too Cold Scorpio when I saw him there. And then the characters that they had, I remember they used to do these awesome music videos for people like Sabu, or for a feud between, like, Dreamer and Raven. Their TV production really was what got me. Because I've always kind of liked niche things anyway. I've always just found, like, something that I find a little bit more, give a little bit more effort to be a little bit more artistic, do a lot with a little. I really liked how almost, I don't think rustic's quite the word, but raw that their TV show was. I thought it was produced in such an interesting way, and they used all this great music that they had no right to. I guess that's one of the interesting things I can talk about, is like that they pretended for years that they had special rights to use all the music that they did. They never did. They never did, but they would go so far as to like put out press release stuff to the wrestling media about deals they made with Tommy Boy, or so they could use something in the music video, or they would put stuff on their TV show at the end about getting it. And it's, I've found no evidence whatsoever. And people I talked to said, yeah, like one of their guys said, yeah, Paul would tell me to go get a Bush CD in Times Square at 2 a.m. because we were producing TV. And he would just, go, that song would be perfect. And then they'd just go get it. So when in that period did he write to the people who own the rights? You know what I mean? Like, and
get the express written consent of,
right. But he was brilliant at doing this stuff. He just acted like he belonged. He walked into a room and acted like he belonged there. You know what I mean?
Hey, if you believe you belong somewhere, that's 80% of the battle, man. Joe, you got something?
Yeah, I was just curious. I mean, after all these interviews you did, and like you said, you interviewed some people twice. Mm-hmm. Who do you think was like the easiest person to interview, or I guess not easiest, but who do you think was your favorite in regards to just easy to work with in that instance?
From the media, like pretty much all of them were awesome. Mike Johnson has really good sound bites. He saved our butt a few times when we were like looking for something concise to edit. Wrestlers, there have been so many that were so cool. Like I go back to Ted Petty and Johnny Grunge were amazing. It was very sad, when they passed away, because they were just really good people. man, like, I would say 90% of them, like, Balls was great. I asked Balls for 5 minutes. I got 35. Axel was really good. You know, he was full of piss and vinegar, you know, like.
I was gonna say, was there anybody who just severely like, why the fuck are you even talking about ECW anymore?
The people who perceive themselves as stars were more difficult, I think.
Okay.
Like, Sandman was kind of tough. He was all over the place. I just think that's who he is. You know what? In hindsight, though, I think all the interviews ended up being of value. The most frustrating person was probably, because I see the question up on the screen. I don't know if he's the worst person to interview, but Raven was very difficult. Scott Levy dicked us around a lot. I mean, we had the interview set up, and then he didn't show up at the building. We were supposed to interview him before an ROH show, and then he didn't want to do it at the end of the night. He just didn't feel like it. You know, we were bending over backwards. We stayed at the whole show. You know, he didn't feel like it. So get him the next time. So we had to drive to Jersey. And then I confirmed it with him earlier in the day. He didn't show up on time again. And then we couldn't find a place to do it. He said, I'll do it after my match. That's where he had a pretty well-known dog collar match with CM Punk at one of their big shows in Jersey. I think the second year of ROH's existence. So we ended up in like a closet doing an interview with him. He's like half bloody. It's an interesting visual. But he started like telling me how to do my job, you know, like about how I would edit it later. And I'm like, dude, just talk. I'm going to edit it all, you know. He was like, you'll have to do this. And then he would start over. And then he just decided that I asked him a question that he didn't like. So he grabbed the questions from me, told me what questions that what were stupid and what that he would answer, which was like 2 more questions because he said he was getting tired. I mean, this is like 15 minutes into the interview. It's funny, for the 20 minutes I got from him, it actually ended up being worth it. But for years, I was just like, you know, I cataloged all the interviews minute by minute with basic bullet points. And for years, I just refused to even catalog that interview. I was just so I was so disappointed because I had always heard what a mind he was for the business. I thought he would just have such a fascinating perspective. And you know what? In the end, I think he did, but we really had to cull the limited footage that we had to get those interesting thoughts, you know? Maybe it's my fault. I just expected, you know, more from the guy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I kind of understand that. He does seem like a smart guy. All right, John. So, if anybody needs to give you their hard-earned monies, what's the best way to reach you?
All right. Okay, yeah, we've gone this long in the interview, and I haven't really gotten to this part. Yeah, we really need closing costs on this movie. We are on Kickstarter right now. Today is the exact halfway point of our 30 days. We're trying to raise the money we need for the post-production to get it out to everybody, which includes, you know, like a lot of editing stuff and color correction and mastering of things, legal stuff, errors and omissions insurance, marketing to be able to get it out to people across the nation, film festivals, stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of things. It's all nickel and dime stuff. There's no one expenditure that's gigantic, but when you add it all up, it's a bunch of money. So please go to Kickstarter.com if you're interested in this. Search ECW. Our project will pop up with my name, John Philapavage, and it'll say a documentary about Extreme Championship Wrestling. Watch our videos. Please pledge some money because basically it's a pre-order service in a lot of ways. And there are tons of gifts if you want to give more money. Basically for everything you pledge, you're getting something, including early access to stuff we have on our backers page. For the last week, we've had a segment out there, which is something raw that we put together, which is like 6 minutes about the violence in ECW. $30 gets you the DVD, a movie poster, I think a sticker and the access to the behind the scenes stuff, and it just goes up from there. So
you get some great pledge goals on here. My favorite is the $10,000 one, where you could have someone like Stevie Richards or Blue Meanie in your house talking ECW while you watch the movie. I just think that would just be the best $10,000 I think you could ever possibly spend.
And we made sure to get the safe people, you know?
Yes.
It's all people that I would have in mind, because, dude, I got to travel with these people, so, you know.
No New Jack.
No. They said, you know who would do that? And I was like, nah, like I said, I already went through it twice. I got out clean. I'm good.
Don't want to be stuck on an airplane with him.
Was it hard to get Stevie Richards to not talk about tech?
Oh, no, he was so excited to talk to us because he was asking us about our editing software, our equipment, and...
He is such a nerd.
Yeah,
It's so awesome.
And his show, his video cast that he does is actually really entertaining.
I know, right?
It's amazing. He's an awesome guy, yeah. I wish I was more into tech, so...
Yeah, it's just one of those things where I remember Joe tossed it my way, and I was like, oh, okay, this is gonna be one of those video blog things where it's gonna be low rent and everything. That guy knows his shit. I was really happy to see that. Because it's interesting when you see these guys with their hobbies and what they're really interested in. Besides that, it's like weird. It's like finding out that like some senator is really into like Magic the Gathering. You're like, really? I mean, like just hardcore. So
nerd.
Yeah.
And it's nice. And it's nice to run into a tech nerd who can beat the shit out of you.
Yes, that too. Yes.
but he wouldn't. I mean, he's
in Dixie shorts.
Yeah,
Yes.
Daisy Dukes. One thing I gotta say, guys, is if we do not reach the Kickstarter goal, you do not get charged, but we also do not get any money, So it's really important that we reach our goal. If we don't, though, it's safe. Amazon Payments handles Kickstarters. Kickstarter's a pretty mainstream site now, that helps artists of all kinds get funded. It's safe. It's easy. Please support us. I really want to put out something cool and intelligent and complete, about wrestling and a subculture, which is just interesting, the study of a subculture in itself. So
yeah, you really should support that. The reason the instant that I absolutely had that I wanted you on the show was when you said it was a subculture of a subculture, which is such
really
a brilliant way of putting it. So, John, thank you so much for being on. We're going to be posting a link to the Kickstarter on our Facebook page as well as in the show notes on YouTube, so you can hit them up there. Right now, you're just sitting at about half with 15 days, well, a little bit under half with about 15 days to go.
Time schedule. We're at 40%. I just got to say.
Yeah, these things tend to spike at the end, though. So anybody and everybody, you got a friend, you got a rich uncle, whatever, head to Kickstarter.com, definitely search for the ECW documentary, and just give them whatever you can. Give them a little bit of scratch, because this is something that, look, let's be honest, this is going to be one of those things that it's probably never going to happen. With such a tight lid that WWE has on all these guys, and with TNA, and no one wants to say anything, I firmly believe this kind of documentary will never happen again. So we gotta support these guys. We gotta support the Kickstarter support. Just get out there, give as much as you can, as little as you can, because it's something that we as fans made ECW what it is, and we really should give back to that and allow it to live on in a capacity that isn't being produced by Vince McMahon and his cadre of guys at WWE. I mean, let's be honest.
And you get to own it. You get to own it. Yeah,
exactly. You get to say that I helped fund this, and how awesome is that?
Yeah.
Oh, John, thank you so much for being on, buddy. Really appreciate it, especially with your busy schedule. I know next up you got a red carpet date with Angelina Jolie, so I want to thank you so much for being on here. Let us know, Mr. Hollywood, that we appreciate you being on the show. So, good luck. Good luck with Kickstarter. Hope you exceeds your wildest expectations, and you can retire within the next month on this thing.
And if you do this one, get this one funded and completed and out. You might want to try and tackle WCW, because I know WWE did a horrible job with their with Rise and Fall.
That documentary was so bad.
At least their ECW one was interesting, but the WCW one was horrible. So,
Well, thank you guys so much for having me and giving me the platform to talk. And I hope people see my passion for this and they want to help out. I mean, this would mean the world to me. I want to give you guys a good product. So, thank you guys for having me.
Oh, thank you, Sean.
Man.